Arrived, and what a week this is. Everyone loves Thanksgiving week because it is a couple of days off, and it's also great football, and we have plenty of that this weekend. And let's get right to it as we begin the last week of the regular season.
This one simply says Texas is terrible. Low-hanging fruit or truth?
That's 100% true.
Yeah.
I mean, dumpster fire is used too often. I don't think it is a dumpster fire. I just think it's sad that Texas is still Texas, which is not impressive.
Can we just say they're backwards?
I think it's better for Tennessee, rather than to have, a couple of those top 25 victories, to beat all the teams in the SEC East that you're trying to pass to at least, get yourself into the top tier.
That's why I asked you, have you been to a doctor? Because I think you really need to go see a doctor other than your wife.
The most important thing, I've had the support of my bosses here at ESPN, and that's all that matters to me.
You have an unranked opponent who scores on you on 8 consecutive possessions.
No. I wouldn't let Oklahoma within 100 miles of the college football playoff this year.
Everyone's worried about LSU, to be honest. And it is actually interesting that the focus just goes completely past Georgia Tech, not just because it's a rivalry game, not just because it's on the road, but because with Georgia's offensive troubles, if Georgia doesn't fix those offensive troubles, the game could be close for a while.
There's no excuse for Bama's schedule. They could be in a better situation if they were a better team. But I just don't see Bama being in the number 4 spot tonight. I think, or tomorrow night, I think the polls stay the same.
And this, you're not going to believe, Todd Grantham. That guy should have been a head coach a long time ago.
I think even with Mac, Bama is better than Georgia.
Hey, man, I'm just tired of the Big 12 not getting any respect, man.
Well, I'm a big LSU fan, and that's part of it, Paul.
Well, it's been a great year then.
Yes, sir.
It's the day before Thanksgiving. We're live in New York today. I am being fitted for the float in the Macy's Thanksgiving parade. I'll be fitted for the balloon later today. Let's get to the question du jour. We're 3 hours before the college football playoff reveal. Most people think they know what's going to happen, but the question I've been getting for a couple of days now, and many are asking, if everything happens according to plan, which it rarely does, would Alabama get in over Utah? Many of the so-called experts have put Utah in there, probably because they hate Alabama. But let's find out what really is going on. Seth Walder joining us from ESPN Analytics. Seth, if you listen to some of the national media, the pundits, those who make a living with hot takes, certainly not, don't look at me, you would think Alabama is dead and gone, but something tells me you are going to give us a different story. What's the deal on Alabama?
Paul, I don't really see how you could say that Alabama is out of this thing. At this point, look, I think that our number, which we admit, it does not consider Tua's injury explicitly. So we probably are overrating Alabama. The scenario you laid out where everybody kind of wins out, we put Alabama at about 75%. Even if that's high, ultimately you're going to have Alabama against Utah. Alabama's going to have a resume case. There is a 19% chance a top 25 team could go 11-1 with Alabama's schedule. There is a 32% chance that same team could go 12-1 with Utah. So Alabama, what they've done is more impressive. At the top of the schedule, they have LSU and Auburn. Those two are. It's going to be at Auburn. Those two are both better games than what would be Utah's toughest game, which would be Oregon on a neutral field.
I think it was Tim Brando who was on here the other day talking up at Utah. And listen, I'm not here to disparage Utah. I think they have a really good coach and a really good team. But as you get inside the numbers there, help us better understand why the predictor seems to favor Alabama so much more than Utah.
Well, part of it is how good we think Alabama is, and a little bit of that is going to still be residual effect of Utah. But what Alabama's accomplished, I think, is the key thing. To me, the thing that really that I don't really get is people talk about two things with injuries regarding these two teams. So number one, the committee's always saying it doesn't project, and yet in order to keep Alabama out in this situation, I think what you have to do is you are projecting Alabama to be a different team with Mac Jones, and ultimately people are going to judge Mac Jones on a single game, the Iron Bowl, really, and so that is a projection. The bigger point I want to make is that Rob Mullins mentioned last week Zach Moss missed the game against USC, or missed a lot of that game, and in the game, of course, that Utah lost. You can't, A, say that without mentioning the fact that Keaton Slovis missed most of that game, and B, I sure hope the committee's thinking about every time a weak side linebacker's out or a slot corner's out, because if you open the door to running back injuries, you better consider all 22 guys on the field in every single game.
Seth, on that front, let's try to figure out the Mac Jones effect. I know the committee can't, but all eyes will be on him against Auburn. Is it just about Alabama winning this game?
I think it ought to be. Certainly a blowout would help their case. No one's going to dispute that, because it would show them what they can do. Of course, it's a single game. I mean, how long have we watched college football and known that anything can happen in a single game? So if Alabama only narrowly beats Auburn, on the road, by the way, are we really to say that this team is not good enough to get into the playoff? I certainly think that a blowout loss would help their case, but I still believe that Alabama could get in, and the playoff predictor definitely thinks Alabama could get in, even with a sort of close loss at Auburn.
Let's talk about Georgia for a moment. We feel pretty comfortable in stating that Georgia loses, they are gone. But what if Georgia wins? We think that affects Alabama. Are we correct?
Yeah, of course. I mean, if Georgia wins, I think that sets up basically the easiest scenario that you can have. Georgia would be in, LSU would probably be in, and then Clemson and Ohio State, presuming they win out. That's a straightforward case. I think people might be even sleeping on this scenario a little bit. I was surprised when I saw our number of Georgia versus LSU in the SEC championship game. We make that a 52-48 game for LSU, so that's really close. LSU has the offensive advantage, but Georgia's defensive advantage, I should say, is almost as strong. And then you add in the fact that this game will be played in Atlanta. That's something FPI considers. It's a neutral-ish game, but not completely neutral. And Georgia is almost a coin flip to win that game. So that is a game that could absolutely make this thing a real easy slam dunk decision for the committee.
I try to be objective and neutral, but every time, Seth, somebody brings up Oklahoma, it does irritate me, because I don't get it. I don't see how you could look at Oklahoma, watch them play, and think they belong in the Final Four. Where is the computer on the committee projection?
Paul, you're in line with the computer on this one, because firstly, they haven't been as good, like you said, and secondly, they haven't beaten enough in terms of quality to really earn that sort of discussion. I think there is kind of a scenario where you could put them in, but it's very specific. I mean, you think about Alabama losing the Iron Bowl. If LSU were to win out, and then maybe Utah loses, yeah, okay, maybe you get to that situation where they can be the only other one-loss team that you would really think about. But that's a very specific scenario. I do not think Oklahoma's going to get in. Ultimately, we give them a 12% chance. Their resume, by the way, is a little bit worse than Utah's by our measure. So 12% chance for Oklahoma. I would not bank on that.
I told one of the better-known, maybe the best-known ESPN personality today that the Ohio State-Michigan game really doesn't matter, especially if Ohio State loses and it's, something south of 49-0. Was I right in making that point?
You were right, as long as Ohio State doesn't lose to Michigan and then lose again. That would be the only way that this thing could matter. Actually, we took a look, and ultimately, it really doesn't matter. Ohio State needs to win one of its next two games. Which one probably doesn't? This one, the Michigan game, is probably the most insignificant. They lose this one, go on, win the Big Ten championship. They are a 100% slam dunk, put them in the playoff. The other way around, it's almost certain. We still think it's very likely, even in the worst-case scenario where Ohio State were to beat Michigan, then lose to Minnesota, we would still say 80% chance the Buckeyes get in.
There's another game that's interesting. We just heard Will Muschamp talk about being on the wrong side of this rivalry right now, but South Carolina did beat Georgia, so I guess there's a chance at home they could beat Clemson. What happens if Clemson loses?
Clemson is in trouble if it loses. Now, I think you and I both are equally skeptical of the chance of that actually happening, but you never know. We would have been pretty skeptical before that Georgia game, too. I think if Clemson loses at 12-1, even if they go on and win the ACC championship, their schedule is so easy that you really would have a hard time justifying putting them in the playoff predictors' estimation. You know, I gave you those numbers earlier on Alabama and Utah. If Clemson goes 12-1, an average top 25 team would have a 55% chance to have gone 12-1 against their schedule. That's how easy it is that you would just expect that, bet more likely than not. So we do think that Clemson would not deserve to get in if it were to lose any game.
And finally, what about this Minnesota-Wisconsin game? Game day thought it was pretty important. It's going to be an entertaining game, but what's the significance of the impact on the rankings?
Ultimately, Minnesota is still in this thing. I think it's a real long shot because of what they have to do, and we just don't think that Minnesota is that great of a team. They're 17th in FPI. If they were to beat Wisconsin and beat Ohio State, we make them about a 50-50, 48% chance to get in. The reason why that number isn't higher is because of what we talked about earlier. Georgia. If Georgia beats LSU, that kind of takes away that spot that Minnesota could earn. So you really can't give them a lock even if they do win out. But Minnesota, look, it's this late. It's already at Thanksgiving. We're still talking about Minnesota as having a feasible chance at the playoff. That's pretty impressive.
Great to have you on, Seth. We will talk next week as we get really close to the final rankings. Thanks for your time. We'll be back with you a week from today.
Thanks, Paul.
Got it. We'll get your reaction at 855-242-7285. All of that coming up next.
Okay, we got the Iron Bowl at home this week. I know all of our players and our coaches are extremely excited about that. You know, you look at last year's game and first half, I thought we played a good first half. It got away from us in the second half. We're going to have to do a good job of really playing 4 quarters of football come Saturday. You know, when you look at them this year offensively, you know, one of the best in the country. One of the more explosive offenses, if not the most explosive offense. You look at the receivers, they can all take short ones a long way. The running backs are very impressive. Do a good job running, but they also do a good job catching the ball out of the backfield. And then, of course, their offensive line is one of the best in the country. They do have a new quarterback, but the games he's played, he's been efficient. And looks like he has a good grasp of the offense. You know, when you look at their defense, you know, one of the top-ranked defenses in our league again. Real impressed with the guys they have on the back end. They've got very good ball skills and can really run. This will be our 5th top 10 opponent, so the good thing is it won't be a shock to our system, and really hoping that'll be an advantage for us. It'll be senior day, which is always special, you know, to honor this group that has done such a good job for us. And then I want to congratulate Derek Brown, you know, finalist for 6 national awards. He chose to come back, and he's had his best season. You know, he's playing as good a football as anybody in the country. And, you know, I know that Heisman is usually for offensive players and all that, but there can't be too many better players around the country than him. So real excited for him. But, you know, I think you got to focus on the Iron Bowl right now and the fact that we are battle tested. We played some of the best teams in the country, you know, and so we've hung in there. We had chances to win, you know, some of those. So I think that really helps us. And then, you know, you look at the future. I mean, we've got some outstanding young guys. I know the focus has been on the seniors, which have done a super job, but we've got some young guys that can flat out play. So the future's real bright. We're real excited for the future, and you know, we'll cross that bridge as far as the schedule goes, you know, next year. Yeah, you know, when you look back at close games, you know, there's a fine line between winning and losing, and a lot of times it's either 1 or 2 plays, impact plays when the game's on the line that you have to make to win the game, and that's probably the thing that has stood out the most. We've been very close. We had opportunities. You look back, there's 1 or 2 things, and if you would have made those plays, we would have had a good chance to win, or we'd have won the game. So, you know, when you're playing, you know, it's the top teams, you got to make plays to win the game, and so that's really our goal for this one, and you know, that we'll need to do that.
Welcome back. So glad you are with us here on what's been a really interesting Tuesday afternoon. Is everybody really in a pretty good mood? And why not? It's one of the great weeks of the year. It's rivalry week, the Iron Bowl, Thanksgiving, Michigan, Ohio State. We've talked about Clemson, South Carolina. I mean, it's just amazing. And John Talty, our good friend, who one of the top editors at AL.com. John, good afternoon. How's everything in Alabama? The Iron Bowl fever at an all-time high, or is it just another Iron Bowl?
I think it's just another Iron Bowl right now, honestly. I think that, at least from what I've kind of experienced, is almost a lack of enthusiasm around that game. And I'm sure we can get into it in a little bit, but I'm not feeling kind of the sense of excitement and the sense of the stakes of this game the way that we have in some recent years down here.
Yeah, and I read in your publication website platform that 30 years ago, John, I don't know if you were born yet, the Iron Bowl, first time ever at Auburn, remains to this day one of the most incredible events I've ever been to, and I know that has been well documented, but it does seem like that game has lost something over the years.
Yeah, and Paul, I was a whopping 6 months old when that game got moved to Auburn, so I was technically around for it. I don't know if I have a ton of memories from it, but I was around. But yeah, I mean, we've had some incredible games, as you well know, over the years. The '89 game, Auburn fans still, there's so much kind of attachment to that, and it's crazy that for a lot of those people that it's already been 30 years. But you go down the line, you've had the kick six and the comeback, and even that game 2 years ago, in which Auburn won and then Alabama went on to win a national championship. There just seems to be a lot more kind of hype around it. I think in part because of the Tua injury and the hangover that's kind of lingered over the Alabama fan base. There's just a general lack of, I don't want to say interest, but just lack of, again, excitement about what's going to happen in this game. I think there's almost a resigned acceptance from Alabama fans that even if they win, they're probably not getting into the playoffs.
John, let me ask you about some of the hot button issues there right now, and I don't think there's any getting around what Nick Saban said yesterday being one of them. It's not the most important thing, but just your reaction to what he said. Was it preordained? Has Nick Saban ever had a slip of the tongue? Answer being no. And how is it playing in your state?
I mean, you got to start the politicking when you can, Paul. And so, we saw it 2 years ago again after they lost and didn't make the SEC championship. Nick Saban was very active in trying to build a case, whether it was on ESPN airwaves or in other areas, to try to get his team into it. And so, I think that it's possible to slip of the tongue. I know, really meant the defensive line and not purely just the team. But, it wouldn't surprise me certainly to try to build up this game because, if Alabama wins, it's clearly going to be the best win that they have all season. And so he needs that win to feel important, to feel like it's a big deal, and to remind people that Auburn is a really good team, even if they already have 3 losses. So, it's just kind of what he has to do. And so I think we're kind of starting to see that process already. And I think that we'll see if Alabama wins that game. You're going to see Saban kind of point to how good that Auburn team is to try to kind of build the case to get into the playoffs.
And, John, the other story, it's not secondary, it's primary, is Gus Malzahn's future. I know if you step back and look at Auburn from a distance, it looks like a really good program. If you're standing there grabbing coffee in Lee County right now or in Auburn, you're going, why is Malzahn so much part of the conversation about his future? Can you explain to people elsewhere why this is always a topic of conversation?
Well, I think the most obvious thing that you can point to is just what's happening in Tuscaloosa. I think that Auburn's always going to be compared to Alabama, and given the amount of success that Nick Saban has had, that's always going to be what Auburn fans want. And so when they're not able to consistently win at the level that Alabama has, and when they've, especially this year, really blown good opportunities to get these kind of marquee wins that you need to compete for a national championship, that's going to lead to fan, resentment, growing frustrations. And I think what's particularly, different about this year, again, is that, and I've mentioned this on your program before, that, Gus taking the play calling and taking, really making the offense his thing. Well, when the offense is the biggest problem with your team, that's going to lead to some serious fan frustration. And so when you look at the fact that the offense was really the biggest kind of downfall for them in their 3 losses, and they lose to Alabama, there's a good chance it'll be the offense's fault. That's why people are kind of already like, all right, what's going on here? And if Gus can't get it done this year, and with this team that he has, like, is he ever going to get it done? And I think that's kind of what leads to some growing frustration and resentment in the Auburn area.
John, does his future hang in the balance on the outcome of this game?
I don't think so, Paul. But as you well know, whether it's Iron Bowls or Egg Bowls or some of these other rivalry games, really weird results can kind of sway things one way or another. We've seen coaches lose their jobs because of the Iron Bowl or Egg Bowl results, and we've seen coaches keep their jobs because of that. So, if Alabama beats Auburn by 45 points, could I see something crazy happening? Sure. Now, for the record, I don't think that's going to happen, but you never really know what a rivalry game with this intensity and so much wrapped into it, how that's going to sway people one way or another. But I think that Gus has, privately indicated that, and he's said this in past years, and I think he's, indicated this is one of the reasons why he stayed last time he had opportunities, is that he thinks that Auburn is his best shot to win big. And so the only way that I think he's going to leave is if they tell him you got to go. And between the big buyout number and some other different factors, I find it hard to believe that Gus won't be back next season. But again, crazy things happen, and certainly, the Iron Bowl can lead to some crazy results.
John Talty with us, a senior sports editor at AL.com. Of course, the game is on 3:30 Eastern, 2:30 local on CBS. You wrote quite an opus the other day on the CBS contract. I realize this is awkward coming from where we sit, but explain in simple terms, if possible, what's going on between the SEC and CBS in relation to its future 3:30 window.
Yeah, absolutely. And first off, I just want to say I appreciate you using the word opus. That's a great one. I don't think people use that word that much anymore. So I appreciate that. That's a great compliment. But yeah, I think, so as everybody knows, SEC and CBS, I think in some ways, there's been such a great brand there, and there's been a lot, attention around that 2:30, 3:30 game, depending on your time zone. And, CBS wants to keep that game, and they've made that known to the SEC. But a lot of other people, including the company that you collect a paycheck from, wants this game, because it's not only are you getting the top pick each week, you're getting the Iron Bowl, you get the largest cocktail party, you're getting all these huge games, but you also get the SEC championship. And from people that I talk to, people think that the SEC championship alone is worth more than the $55 million that CBS is paying each year to the SEC for all of those rights. So we're kind of coming up to what's going to be a battle for these rights. I think that everybody expects it to be worth a lot more in the upcoming deal. It runs out in 2023, but most people expect something to happen before then. And so it's this really fascinating kind of thing on the horizon of, A, where do these games go? Do they stay with CBS? Do they go to ESPN, Fox, all these different kind of potential partners? But B, just how much money is involved. The SEC schools already get a lot of money from their television contracts, but they've been held back, especially compared to the Big Ten, because of getting, $55 million is a lot, but it's kind of paltry when we think about how much these rights could be worth. And so it's an opportunity for SEC schools to get an injection of serious money when this next contract comes up.
Yeah, and for those who didn't read it, I would recommend everyone going back to read John's piece from last Thursday. It's about as comprehensive a piece on the relationship between the SEC and its television partners. But that deal was done, I believe, 10 or 11 years ago. John, the television world is not the same as it was when then Commissioner Mike Slive signed that long-term deal with CBS. At the time, signing with a blue blood network like CBS seemed like a good deal. Today, CBS's role in the world, the television world, has diminished, and the money certainly has exploded.
Yeah, absolutely. The game's constantly changing, and I think, I know that Mike Slive was a friend of yours. I always thought extremely high of him, and I think he made so many great deals. If you look back at a little bit of, hindsight, locking in a 15-year deal at the time that they did, at the money that they did, maybe hasn't aged the best. But so much, as you said, has changed. And, there was this fear in the past, with cord cutting and things like that these big money deals are going to start dropping in value. But we're really seeing the exact opposite. We see that these numbers keep going higher and higher and higher because live sports is still what draws people to the TV. So CBS has had an incredible discount for a long time. I'm sure they've made a lot of money off the SEC. It's probably been very good for their brand. But if they want to keep the SEC going forward, they're going to have to jack up that price by at least a quadruple amount. We're talking $200 plus million. A lot of people think potentially 250 to 300 million. And so it's just a lot has changed since 2008, which was the last time they had this extension. And by the end of the deal, 2023, I mean, a lot can change in this industry again. I mean, it's constantly evolving, as you well know.
Yeah, John, we had Vince Thompson on this program Friday from Athens. He's, as you probably know, the head of Melt, which is one of the nation's leading sports marketing firms. And he said the number, quite frankly, in today's unpredictable environment, could even go as high as $400 or $500 million. I mean, that's how valuable this package is, and how undervalued and really, you said it. I mean, what CBS is paying for it is quite, well, just downright ridiculous, if I might say so myself. John, great to have you on. Always a pleasure. Just people should go back and read John's piece. It's been universally received and commended by many people in the industry. We will talk to you soon. See you this weekend, I hope.
Thank you so much, Paul. Absolutely, and appreciate all your praise as always. It's extremely kind.
Thank you very much. John Talty, the senior sports editor at AL.com, truly one of the outstanding young reporter editors in the sports field today. Just delightful to have him on. We are going to take a break. More of your phone calls after.
And to your point, beyond Ed Ogeron, I mean, Pruitt probably would be the conversation. And the conversation really doesn't need to go past Ogeron at this point. But if you did dip down into a second tier, I think Pruitt probably would be in it. I mean, it's kind of remarkable, the fact that they started 0-2, the inexplicable loss to Georgia State. They blow it against BYU, and I think a lot of people, probably myself included, frankly, had them left for dead after that 1-4 start, and then they've turned it around with better quarterback play, and the defense has really got going in this 4-game winning streak. I think it's better for Tennessee, rather than have a couple of those top 25 victories, to beat all the teams in the SEC East that you're trying to pass, to at least get yourself into the top tier, to where, yeah, they're still not in the conversation with Georgia and Florida. Frankly, they're probably still quite a ways off from that. But they're now establishing themselves as the top of that next pack, whereas coming into this season, they've been the bottom of that other pack for the last couple seasons. I think he really struggled early on. I felt like he was swimming in Jim Chaney's offense. I think there was the belief, myself included, coming into the season, that Jim Chaney was going to be really good for Garantano. And I think ultimately he probably still is. But the fact is, at the beginning of the season, Garantano was working with his fourth offensive coordinator in as many seasons, and you just felt like he was swimming in that offense. And then I think he made some bad decisions. His confidence probably got shaken a little bit. And I thought we'd pretty well seen the last of him. When he fumbled on that quarterback sneak against Alabama, I really felt like the coaching staff had lost all faith in him, all trust in him at that point. Certainly the fan base was up in arms with Garantano at that point over that fumbled quarterback sneak. And I thought that was pretty much going to be it for the Garantano era. Now, they needed him, and so he played by necessity the couple weeks after that, because his freshman replacement, Brian Maurer, had some injury concerns. And Garantano, to his credit, performed pretty well in relief. And so then there was this narrative that maybe he's just better off the bench, which never really made sense, because he'd started so many games in his career and he'd had some good games last year as a starter. I really think what it was is they simplified the offense a little bit for him. And then in the other direction, I think he just got a better understanding of what Jim Chaney wanted out of him and the expectations. Early in the season, I think he was improvising a little too much in terms of changing Chaney's play calls, and maybe just had a little bit too much freedom and not sure what to do with it. Now I think he's got a much better handle on it. He's confident, and the team has bought back in him too. I think this team is fully behind him.
Welcome back. Glad you're with us here on a Tuesday afternoon. We're 2.5 hours away from what is not expected to be a very eventful college football ranking show. We believe it will be pretty much according to plan. Maybe what Rob Mullins says will be watched and listened to very closely, but the Alabama-Auburn game obviously is going to dictate so much this weekend. Let's go to Will next. Hey, Will, nice of you to call.
Hey, Paul, thanks for taking my call.
Thank you.
First of all, let me commend you for your professionalism in working through this illness for the last couple of weeks. It's just with so many people bagging work, for the slightest things, jumping on planes from city to city and doing multiple programs and maintaining the show. I'm sure I speak for a lot of people in saying how much.
Well, let me say this, and I sincerely apologize for sounding as bad as I have sounded, but I really believe it's just. I mean, the calendar the last couple of weeks, and I'm not somebody who feels like this show can't go on without me. I know it can. But I just really didn't want to miss any of this. And if there's only so much. If you're really sick, you can't get on a plane. I've never been really sick. So I just want people to know that it's not like I'm getting on a plane with IV in my veins. I'm just getting on a plane that I probably in May or June would have not gotten on. But right now I want to be here, and I do appreciate the audience in indulging what has to be a rather terrible sounding host, but thank you anyway.
Hey, well, we appreciate you too. Hey, I'd like to get your perspective on something. 3 years ago, I remember watching LSU play Texas A&M in College Station, and during the whole broadcast, all we heard about was how Tom Herman was going to be the next coach at LSU, replacing Ed Orgeron. And the year before, at the same game in Tiger Stadium, when Les Miles was coaching for his job.
Oh yeah.
All we could hear was how Jimbo Fisher was going to be the next coach at LSU, or that was the rumor at least. And then,
by the way, that was not a rumor, Will. That was happening.
Oh, I know it was, and we came to find out that LSU refused to pay the price tag that came with Jimbo Fisher. At least that's what I'm hearing. And then, of course, we know that Herman was using LSU as a negotiating chip to get the job at Texas. And then what I've heard for 2-3 years now is that LSU had to settle. But my question to you is, with what we see today, did they really settle? And I know hindsight's 20/20, but if you look at the contracts that were structured, Ed Orgeron was a steal. I mean, even if you look at it from like a risk versus reward, I mean, I think they pay him they started paying him only about $3.5 million a year, which is nothing. I don't make nothing close to that, But I mean, 3.5 a year for a top flight program in the SEC, that's almost minimum wage. I mean, would you?
No,
agree?
That's ridiculous. Listen, I'm with you, and I don't want to act like we're sneezing at that kind of money. We're not. But in the parlance of big-time college football, that's at the low end.
Right, and I think this year he's only making $4 million. Of course, he's going to make more than that with incentives, but it's not going to come close to the $7.4 or $5 million that Jimbo Fisher is making at Texas A&M. And by the way, I know you know this, all of that money is guaranteed. So he signed a $75 million contract. And we look at ourselves entering, the last week of the 2019 season. We see Herman is struggling in Texas. We see Jimbo Fisher has yet, unless you want to count that LSU game last year, has a defining win at Texas A&M. And Ed Orgeron is leading the LSU Tigers into the SEC championship game with a possible playoff bid and a national championship. And I just want to know, what do you think as far as moving forward, moving after 2019, wherever the calls fall? Where do you see these programs? I mean, and then I'd also like to see what you think about, this might be a little bit of a conspiracy theory, but wasn't it Scott Woodward that negotiated that contract with Jimbo Fisher? And now he's at LSU within what?
Well, yeah. It was exactly Scott Woodward who negotiated that. Let me say that. Let me take Jimbo Fisher first. I still believe Jimbo Fisher will be successful at A&M. I'm not making excuses for anybody, I promise you. But I think this year's schedule is as difficult as I've ever seen. And, Saturday will mark the third number one team in the country he has faced, and he didn't win any of those. He's lost to Georgia, which is a top 4 team. The only game I think that I might quibble with is losing to Auburn. I know it was an 8-point game, but it just seemed like it was a lot more than that. That was at home.
And
I think Tom Herman may be beyond salvage at Texas. I don't see. I mean, I know he went to the Sugar Bowl last year, and Ellinger talked about how we're back, but I mean that program is a train wreck right now, and it's going to show up in recruiting at the worst possible time. And I'm not crazy. I've never been wildly crazy about Joe Oliva's tenure in Baton Rouge, but I'll give the guy credit. He stood firm, and had he not, he would have gone on to someone other than Ogeron. So it turned out to be, unanswered prayers, whatever cliche you want to throw in there. It just happened to be the steal of the century.
Well, and I agree with you, and I'm not a big fan of Joe Oliva. I think he was, let's just say, I think he was a tad arrogant at times.
Oh, well, he was more than that.
But I also believe that, what do you think it was luck? Do you think it was fate? I do believe that, when you look at it, let's say Orgeron would have basically performed as well as Herman is performing in Texas. You're looking at a minimal buyout and with enough money to go out and find a head coach of maybe greater stature. But you know what? Hey, I'm happy with O. I always thought it was a good move. I never thought, and Glenn Gilbo, who you have on your show a lot, stated once that, he didn't think that either Fisher or Herman would be a good choice because they take care of one side of the ball, but, with what Fisher left at Florida State, and when I look at programs and coaches, it's not so much where, what they do once they get to the program, but how they leave the program. And I know Willie Taggart had some blame to what's going on at Florida State right now, but I also think that Jimbo Fisher left that program in pretty bad shape. And I was very surprised that he got a $75 or $75 million contract guaranteed over 10 years. To me, that was just crazy.
Great to have you on, Will. Great analysis. Thank you very much. We're heading to a break. A lot to do on this Tuesday afternoon program. More of your phone calls when we come back. Welcome back. We are glad you're here, and let's get to the calls at 855-242-7285. Jeff is in Columbus, Ohio.
What's going on, Paul Finebaum?
Hey, Jeff.
Why is everybody surprised you're playing hurt? If you were going to take time off, you'd have taken last week off when the whole SEC took it off. Why would you take it off now? It's rivalry week. It's go time, isn't it?
Yeah, well, last week was I guess I could have missed the Western Carolina-Alabama game. I'm sorry.
Yeah, you could have, but you got to play hurt, Paul. I don't know why these people are surprised. You're not the one to take time off. Come on. Hey, I heard that guy talking to you last segment about coaches and your thoughts on them. That was a perfect segue. I got to find out where you stand about Harbaugh now. I'm thinking you're going to take a job with Waffle House the way you go back and forth on Harbaugh. Tell me where you think Harbaugh's at right now.
I'll tell you Saturday about 3 o'clock. How about that?
You got to admit the biggest fear I've got is the odds are in Michigan's favor. They're due, if nothing else. That's my biggest fear. You could only beat the same team how many straight times? You know what I'm saying? The odds. You got that FPI guy on. I got to believe the odds are starting to lean Michigan's favor just from losing so many times in a row.
One more thing, Jeff.
That's a big concern?
I think it's the emotional aspect, too. Listen, Ohio State's coming off of its most difficult game of the year. That takes a toll.
Yeah. And no doubt Michigan's laying in the weeds. Harbaugh didn't like that beatdown we gave him last year out of nowhere. It kind of reminds me, unfortunately, back in the day when Woody went up there and spanked them up there, and then we came back with the best team in the country, and we got, Schembechler made his name for himself way back when. But it's going to be interesting. I'm kind of hoping Ryan Day was playing it close to the vest last week in the passing game, to be honest with you, because those crossing routes and stuff was how we torched Michigan last year, and I didn't see any of that against Penn State. Did you notice that?
Listen, I mean, that game was so easy, too, Jeff, at the beginning.
Yeah. Oh, I know. Did you watch the whole thing?
No, I saw the second half. I was flying during the first half.
Yeah. Yeah, it got to be a little struggle there in the third quarter. There's no doubt about it. But, hey, when's the next ranking release, Paul? I'm not sure.
That will be.
What is that? I mean, is tonight the UPI or the Sport Magazine ranking release?
This is the Street and Smith.
I didn't know they coming out. If they were playing it smart, tonight would be the first time we see a ranking for the playoffs. That's the way it should be done. The week before rivalry week, when everybody's all fired up. And speaking of the ranking, why are Bama fans all concerned about Oklahoma and Utah and all those teams? The team they should be worried about is Georgia, don't you think?
Well, yes, but, I mean, that's out of their control. If Georgia wins, Alabama's going somewhere other than the playoff.
Yeah, because there's no way. I don't care what the FPI or all those analytics say. There is no way if Georgia wins the SEC, unless utter chaos happens, that Bama's getting in to be the third SEC team. There's no way.
No.
I don't care what the FPI says. I mean, don't you agree there's no way 3 SEC teams are getting in?
Well, there's only one way, and that is Clemson losing.
Right. But who are they going to lose to?
South Carolina?
The Gamecocks?
Either South Carolina
the only way
or
Clemson loses is if Cat Daddy gets into the hotel of the Clemson Tigers and gives them that Palmetto moonshine the night before.
Yeah, no, I don't see that happening. I'm sorry.
No. And somebody out of the Big Ten's getting in. I don't, unless something really wacky happens, somebody from the Big Ten's getting in, don't you think?
Yeah, I think Minnesota could win out and probably get in over most schools.
Yeah, if they don't lose and they beat who they got, Wisconsin this week, and then Ohio State. Yeah, we're in the. So yeah, I mean Minnesota's in if they win out. So
yeah, no, listen. I don't think anybody I don't think anybody realistically thinks the SEC is going to get 3.
Well, that's why I don't know why Bama fans are all bent out of shape about comparing their resume to Utah.
Well, they're just doing it to do it. I mean, listen, what else are they going to do right now?
Right. I guess so. I guess not make travel plans to Atlanta. That's for darn sure. They don't like Atlanta anyway.
They've done better not going to Atlanta a couple of times.
That's true.
I mean, two of Saban's 5 national championships have not been routed through Atlanta. Hey, thanks for the call. Thanks for the Big Ten report brought to you by Jeff.